Pearl Harbor attack was a Japanese aerial surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor on Oahu Island, Hawaii. The operation began on December 7, 1941. The first official attack was at 8:10 when the Japanese exploded the first battleship. This was the USS Arizona. Over 1,100 crewmen were killed in the explosion. Now, why did Japan do such an attack? July 1940. Japan and the US have been nudging each other for decades, and it was not a surprise for war to come. Japan wanted to conquer the southeast of Asia so that they can have more natural resources. However, the US was against this, so they decided to respond with trade embargoes and economic sanctions. As a result, the US stopped sending oil to Japan. This meant that Japan would be limited with their military as they would lack oil. Because of this, there were negotiations and arguments between the US and Japan. Since the negotiations were not getting anywhere, this was the result of Japan to attack first. As a result of trade embargoes and economic sanctions, Admiral Yamamoto starts discussing the idea of invading Pearl Harbor with other Japanese officers. By destroying America's naval force in Pearl Harbor, this will be the result of Japan attacking the southeast of Asia without the US being in the way. Japan hoped to conquer Philippines and Malaya at first so that they can receive oil and rubber while the US was recovering from its damages. Because of this, it was hoping for the US to accept defeat so that Japan could create a fortress that would stretch across the Pacific Rim. This meant that Japan could be one of the strongest countries with a lot of land conquered, good economy, and natural resources. The US intelligence decodes a message about the operation and sends that message to Washington. However, the message only arrived after the attacks commenced. At 7:15 in the morning, Admiral Husband E. Kimmel was told about the submarine but hesitates to attack because he was afraid of it being another false report. So he decides to wait for verification, which led to one of the several fatal mistakes made that morning. At 7:55, the first wave of Japanese aircraft began to work. Along with the ships in Pearl Harbor, the air stations at the Hickam, Wheeler, Ford Island, Kanaho, and Iwo Field are attacked. Many died before they knew what had transpired. At 8:10, the first battleship, the USS Arizona, was hit.
1941, December 7th, ending. At 9 o'clock, the second wave of Japanese aircraft began to attack. This time, the US resisted better, but the damage was still there. The only thing that was going to end the attack was a lack of visible targets and the fear that the Japanese war planners had on how close the American carrier might have been. This means that the Japanese was somewhat scared against the US's military power. This accelerated Japan's operation. Because of this, the Japanese attack lasted over 3 hours, and as a result, it ended up with 200 American aircraft which were either damaged or destroyed, over 2,400 lives lost, 1,104 injured people, while Japan lost just 29 aircraft, several midget submarines, with 64 lives lost. 18 out of the 130 ships was destroyed. This was the result of a deadly war which occurred within several hours. 1941, December 8th. As a result, on the following day at 13:10, the US declares war on Japan. The declaration was formulated an hour after the infamous speech by Franklin D. Roosevelt, the current US president at that time. After the speech was given, the declaration was quickly brought up to a vote. The vote was 82-0 in the Senate and 388-1 in the House. With pretty much all of US agreeing to declare war on Japan, this accelerated the process. This was the result of Japan being aggressive against the US with a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. Following the declaration, Japan's allies, Italy and Germany, declared war on the US. This meant that the US was fully part of the Second World War. Conclusion. The attack on Pearl Harbor was a surprise attack, so there was not much the US was able to do about it. As mentioned before, the casualties were 2,400 lives lost and 1,104 injured people. Although this was a victory for Japan, the consequences were not so pleasant for them. They got the US to take part in war, got atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and they ended up surrendering the war.